On today's episode of the podcast, I get to sit down with Chelsey Scaffidi.
If I don't do, nothing will happen.
She is the author of The Mother Year. In this conversation, she talked about writing this book, her journey into motherhood.
Mom guilt is just like a different flavor of guilt. It's just kind of like a mean voice telling you that you're not doing a good enough job.
I believe you can have it all.
I do too.
But I don't think you can do it all. And I think also everybody's definition of having it all is different.
Your brain is recalibrating for caregiving. You're not just like forgetting things. There's a part of your brain that is intentionally going in to make your brain more efficient.
It was such a beautiful conversation, such a real conversation, and you're definitely going to want to listen to this one. Embodied CEOs don't chase trends. They pave the way. They lead from within, moved by purpose, unshaken by noise. When you are the source, you do not need permission. All right, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah.
In person.
So fun.
It is.
And this is a fun one because we don't know each other super well. We have mutual friends. And so I'm excited to get to know you better and hear about your story.
Me too.
Let's start with your story and your background of entrepreneurship and wherever you feel like is relevant to kind of dive in.
Yeah. I'm like, should I start at the beginning? I feel like the entrepreneur side of me really started. So I guess to back up, I'm a lawyer, and in law school and law firm life, all of that felt very masculine. And I was kind of going through those motions just thought what I thought I kind of had to do, which was like continue forward in my career. And there was a point where I was at a law firm and really feeling unfulfilled from a spiritual, soulful place. And so I left law firm life, or I was doing business and finance law, and went in-house to a private foundation. And that was kind of the first I'd say like very intentional choice point of calling in more of this like flow, more of like a feminine energy of just being able to be more expressive and not so rigid. But even then I am still an in-house lawyer. Now I've been working for entities that do climate and human rights and education for the last 10 years. But there's still a masculine energy of being in law. And so probably 2 years before I had my first baby, I was living in LA. I was working remotely, and I just was like feeling like I wanted something else. And I took a meditation teacher training. I was already a yoga teacher. And I realized in teaching yoga that what I liked the most was the beginning and the end, where you're like helping people drop in. And then at the end, when you're, cueing them into savasana and just like really feeling that like surrender. And so I took a meditation teacher training and started leading meditations, and eventually opened, like probably not that long after, probably a year after, opened a meditation studio in LA. Wow. And I was doing that on the side. So I was like, it was like this, honestly, it was kind of harmonious of like feeling, like for a certain part of my day, I was like the lawyer advising, being a little more in that masculine energy. And then I was, in the early afternoon to evening, I was going to the meditation studio, and it was called Rooted Beings. And it just felt really good. It felt like, okay, this is like another side of me that feels awakened and alive. And then, so we launched that LA, the one in Manhattan Beach specifically, was doing well. And the company or the foundation I was working for at the time was based in Chicago, and they wanted me to come back to Chicago from LA once my husband graduated he was doing an executive MBA program at USC. And so we came back to Chicago right before the pandemic, and we had actually opened up a Chicago pop-up of the meditation studio. So we had 2 locations, one in LA and one in
So you kept the LA one going when you moved?
Kept the LA one. I had a co-founder, one of my best friends, and she was living in LA. So she was kind of running LA and I was running Chicago. And then the pandemic happened and everything shut down. And lucky for us, one of the really smart business decisions that we made was, instead of just like going full on out when we opened the studios, we really wanted to see kind of like what this felt like, what it could look like. And so we actually were subleasing from yoga studios that, for whatever reason, had a desire to have a sublease. And so when the pandemic hit, it was really easy for us to get out of the subleases. And so we moved everything online and started doing teacher trainings and leading online meditations. And so it was kind of easy to move over to this other modality. And then I got pregnant. And I feel like this is like really where a lot of my story starts, because I had no idea what to expect in pregnancy. I was kind of the first of my friends to get pregnant. And I remember knowing that I had 6 months maternity leave and thinking, what am I going to do with this 6 months off? Like, clearly just so delusional about what this first chapter looked like. I wasn't really resonating with a lot of the pregnancy meditations. And so I was recording meditations while I was pregnant. And I was like, when I have this baby and have this 6 months off, which, what a privilege to have maternity leave that's 6 months. It's crazy to say that that's a privilege, because it really should just be a given. But I thought I was going to record meditations and just really like
relax.
Yeah. I was like, I had never had time off. I had gone right from, undergrad to law school to law firm life to in-house life. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to really get to just be. And then I had a baby, and
and nothing can prepare you for that first one.
No, nothing can prepare you. But it really changed a lot. And I think the biggest, if I could, I guess, kind of sum up what it ended up doing to me, was really allowing me to get in touch with my like feminine, flowy, just more attuned surrender side, because I was so used to, like, for lack of a better term, like muscling my way through things. Like if I could research it and I could plan it out, that was kind of my MO. And then in motherhood, you can't really do that as much.
Yeah. So would you say that you were more naturally like masculine energy before?
Yeah.
I have so many, I think female entrepreneurs really relate to that, because like that natural entrepreneurship energy is usually very masculine. Me too. Like, very masculine energy. So I'd love to dig more into that. I get a lot of people who ask me like, how do I tap more into the feminine energy? What does that mean? And it's because it's not the masculine. There's not like steps, right? There's not like, okay, step 1, do this. And for me, it's been like 2 years that I really started to even understand what that meant, like the masculine and the feminine energy, and how to have both exist. And then how to also know that the masculine energy is a strength of mine, right? It's created a lot of success. It's not bad, but how to have more of that flow in business, especially as a female entrepreneur. So I'd love to hear more and dig deeper into that, because that's very relevant for my audience, in how to tap into that energy more, and also what it even means.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing, as you were just talking, that kind of came to me is, for a long time, I felt like, before motherhood, I would have said, I felt like, that like Three Little Bears story where like one bed is too hard and one bed's too soft. Like, for a long time, I would feel like when I was with my lawyer community that I was like too soft for them. Like, I didn't quite fit in to that mold. I remember teaching meditations. Like I was in-house lawyer at a foundation. And during the pandemic, a lot of people were struggling with so much, right? And so they wanted someone to do meditations, and they were going to hire someone. And I was like, no, I can do this. And I remember them being like, but you're the lawyer. Like, how are you going to hold that space for people? Like, how is that going to interfere with your relationship with staff? And ultimately they got on board, and it really opened my relationship with staff, because I sat in a room with them and led meditations. And oftentimes, like, people were uncomfortable or emotional, or they would come and share things with me that they would never have shared. If it's almost like when I let my kind of like feminine energy flow state show, they felt more comfortable. And so I would see that as a good thing. I think they were more apt to come talk to me actually about business related stuff, because we had connected on a different level. But then I was living in LA, and I would go to a lot of these events, these wellness events and community things. And I almost felt like too masculine for them because, as soon as I said I was a lawyer, I don't know, it just felt like there was like they put some distance of like, oh, you're kind of that type A, which surprisingly, I'm really not type A. I'm like a type AB. I'm like the person who's like always last on a flight. Like I definitely do not have the like stereotypical lawyer energy. And so, yeah, for a long time, I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. And I really struggled with that. And then when motherhood came along, I really struggled because I was even more, I feel like that was really encouraging me to go deeper into the feminine but you do need both, And so what I've really come to honor and realize and what I'm always doing the work on is like how to find harmony between those two and to not just, I don't know if like put shade on one or the other. Like it's actually the strength and the ability to research and the ability to plan and think ahead is a strength, but then the ability to let things flow and to surrender and be creative. And I think for my business, that's what I was missing. I felt like, lawyers will say like, oh, there's creativity in the law of like how you draft things or how you word things, but that never felt like a satisfactory creative outlet. And my business in the meditation space, and eventually my book and motherhood really felt like the time to be creative. Like I remember even just like in early motherhood or in late pregnancy, like drawing again and like painting again, like things that I hadn't done in a really long time. Like I hadn't let myself kind of feel that. And so I would say the way that I tap back into it now is actually just having a lot of awareness about it. Because when I'm two in my masculine or two in my feminine, it also doesn't work. I think a good example of this, like living right now in my life, is I wrote a book that came out in March, and my masculine side, like working with my publisher, was like, okay, we need to do a book tour. We need to, there's all these boxes we have to check. And this could go on for years. There are so many things to do with the book. And I like saw the options, saw all of the plans, and then really tuned in. It was like, what feels good for me in this season of life? And I went back to them and asked for kind of what I wanted, which was a book tour that's mom style. So it's one city a month primarily. And I agreed to do, I essentially said I was going to do it for 6 months. And then I'm going to kind of stop touring and reevaluate. But like old me would have done like a 2-year book tour and just been like on the go without any signs of slowing down. And new me is like, okay, I understand there's sprints, but then I have to leave space in between.
Yeah, it's such for me, the last few years, it's like going from, I was like heavy in my masculine, and that still is a strength of mine for sure. I'm like CrossFitter,
Yeah.
But been so powerful to lean into that intuition and like allow that creativity. And really, I think a lot of it is too like trusting the unknown and the surrender piece of it, which when you're heavy in your masculine, you've got the like, I want to control everything and kind of like push through and make it happen and like operate from that place. And then it's like, that only gets you so far. And I feel like it's inevitable, especially as a female, right? Because we're wired differently. You hit a point where it's like, okay, I can't actually keep operating this way. Like that's where the burnout comes in, and there's that misalignment. So right now, when you're trying to have that balance between the two, you have awareness on it. Is there things that you do that it's like, okay, I'm going to intentionally do this to allow more like of my feminine energy, or to let myself be in that space?
I actually want to pull the thread on something that you just said, because I think this ties into the answer to this, which is that for a long time I thought, and even in early motherhood, I remember having this conversation with my husband, that if I didn't do it, it wasn't going to happen. Like if I didn't do something, it wasn't going to get done, or it wasn't going to matriculate into something. And so that put a lot of pressure on me. Like if I don't do, nothing will happen. And the more intuitive feminine side of this says that there is God is working for you. And there are things that actually happen better and more aligned with you when you don't do anything. And the not doing
so
is
hard,
really hard.
So hard to comprehend that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so but I stop myself and ask that a lot. I'm like, am I doing to create because it feels good? Or am I doing to create because I feel like if I don't, that lack mentality is really like creeping up in my mind. And that's, I find myself there a lot and having to kind of manually reprogram myself through meditation, through breath work, through journaling. I voice note a lot. That's like I voice note to myself in the bath all the time. And it's actually really fun because for a long time I went to therapy sessions and I love therapy, but I actually realized like how often I would come to the answer myself.
Right. Because we do know.
Right. You do. And like as you're talking it out loud in a voice note, there's an awareness to it because you can hear it. It's like not just all sitting in your mind, like swirling around. And so I feel like I've been able to have a lot of breakthroughs, like actually talking to myself.
Do you listen to it back or you just talk and then you get the clarity?
I would say 8 times out of 10, I'm just talking to get the clarity. But every so often I'll go back and listen to it to certain ones when I know I was having a hard time, just for hindsight, just to be like, okay, how did that ended up turning out? And actually that's the voice noting is a big part of the book that I wrote. So going back to that first 6 months of having a baby when I thought I was going to just hang out and record meditations. Once I realized I couldn't do that, I didn't even have time to really like pick up a pen and journal because you have like a baby in one hand or you're nursing in the other. I started voice noting myself at night just because I wanted to remember. There was so much that was happening like so quickly. And so I would voice note at night just about what was happening in the day and kind of what made the day worth it or how I was feeling about certain things. And it was really short. It was like a 2-minute voice note, less than, at night. And my husband would sometimes be in the bathroom and he would come out and say like, I didn't realize that happened. He was back to work. And so this became like a nightly ritual. He actually like moonlighted on a couple of them where he would chime in, on something that had happened on the voice note. And now we do this actually for the kids' birthdays. We create a voice note for them on their birthdays every year from us that we want to give to them.
Oh, I love that idea.
And yeah, just like I would love to hear my parents' voice when I was a baby. Because I'm sure it's changed and just like their inflections and what they noticed about me at that age.
Yeah.
But so I had a whole 365 voice notes after my first son's, when he turned a year, and I listened back to them and was going to make like a keepsake book for us. And I listened back to those voice notes and was like, honestly, kind of heartbroken, like listening back to them. I was just so hard on myself. Like I remember not being able to figure out things like sleep and feeding and like, what was I doing wrong? And maybe I needed to try something else. And at the end of the day, I just needed to surrender. Like my baby was learning and growing and, growing teeth and learning to be out in the world. And it was nothing that I was like doing wrong. And there was a couple times listening back to those voice notes where I had a really strong intuitive ping about things. And I kind of outsourced my power to various people. And looking back on it, I was like, I knew. And so listening back to the voice notes, I felt like I wanted to essentially talk to that version. And so the book is that. It's like day by day. It's a daily devotional, 365 day daily devotional on what I would have said to myself in those days to just get me through, like the words I needed to hear.
That's amazing.
Made me feel.
Wow. I bet it was just an incredible experience also listening back to it. I mean, heartbreaking to hear it, but just to have that, because you think you're going to remember, in those moments. And it's like, even with my kids, like you think you're going to remember the little things they say or the little moments. And then unfortunately you don't remember all those details. So just documenting it like that is so cool. I'm going to start doing that for my kids' birthdays. I love that idea.
That's so fun. Yeah. It's become like, I think there's a lot of craziness with technology, but I feel like that's become a way of like using it for good.
You probably could use AI and turn that into a cool like summary or something now really quickly.
Definitely. Yeah. Right. That's like very efficient.
Yeah. So now you still do it in the bath. Like give me an example of like what you would process in the bath that helps you at night with the voice notes that someone could take as like a piece of advice they could implement.
So the last one I did recently was, so I'm doing this book tour, which is, one city a month. So I'm not away for that long. But I've done 4 cities. I have 2 left. And a couple weeks ago, I was on a book tour. I was in Miami for a couple days, and my husband and I had actually gotten away. We had a wedding in Spain. And so my mom and his mom, they fly in together and watch the 2 boys. They're so sweet. They call them, they're Nona and Mimi. And when they're together, they call themselves the Nomies. They're so cute. They love each other and being together, and they really complement each other well.
Oh, that's a dream.
Such a dream. At first, when we introduced our parents, we're like, how's this going to go? Because they're very different, but it's almost like a total yin and yang, where each of their strengths is the other one's not strength. And then, so they kind of complete each other really well. Yeah. And my boys just love it. But in the bath, I was feeling really guilty. I was just like, this is, 5 or 6 days of being away from my kids and then coming back and going on this book tour in Miami. And I could just hear the mean inner monologue of what does that say about me? I'm running this book tour about motherhood, and I'm not being present enough for my boys. And as I was talking it out in the bath about this guilt I was having, a couple things ended up coming to light. And I was like, when I came home from that trip, the Nomies were on cloud 9 because they had all these experiences with my boys that if my husband and I were home, they would not have had. My oldest, who's 4.5, when I'm home, he wants me to sleep with him. But when I was gone, he slept, alternated with each grandma. And he's so sweet in the morning. He wakes up and talks about his dreams. And you have this whole dialogue with him, this really personal interconnection with him. And, just little things like that. When I came home, I saw that they had been able to rely on the Nomies for however many days, and their connection was deepened. And it brought me back to these memories of my grandparents when my parents used to go on these short vacations. The only times I really remember with my grandparents are when my parents weren't there, because my grandparents were kind of the main characters for them. And I'm like, how amazing is it? And that's what came through in the voice note is, how amazing is it that I'm allowing my kids to make these memories with people who love them so deeply. It makes me emotional how much their grandmas and grandpas just deeply love them. And so it was kind of a gift instead of thinking of it as a shameful thing that I did to my kids. It's no, actually I allowed people into their lives who love them. And it also made me realize that mom guilt is just a different flavor of guilt. Before kids, when I felt guilty, it was because I ate something I shouldn't, or did something or said something I shouldn't, or stopped work early to whatever it was, which was okay, that was my conscious saying I'm not sure if that was the right call. But for mom guilt, it's I wasn't doing anything bad. I was doing something that really lit me up. I was on tour meeting with mothers about the book, or I was in Spain at a friend's wedding. I wasn't doing anything quote unquote bad, but this guilt was creeping up. And it's just kind of a mean voice telling you that you're not doing a good enough job.
Yeah.
So
yeah, mom guilt is
all that.
Yeah,
in the bath.
mom guilt is so real. So you use you just have an honest conversation basically in the voice note, and then it usually eventually gets you to a realization or processing it.
Yeah. And I realize often as I'm processing it, how often I'd actually had that same conversation in my mind. And I think as a lawyer, people always say that lawyers like to argue, and I'm not a litigator. I've never been interested in being a litigator. That was never my calling. So arguing, I wouldn't say is my strength. I don't think it's if you're a lawyer, you like to argue. But I do like to see all angles. I love understanding the other side, because that allows me to respond better, to understand just all sides of the argument. And so I think a lot of what happens in those voice notes or when I'm processing is to say okay, this is true, but also what's the other side of the story that I'm not hearing or seeing? And in my mind, it just loops. But when you're journaling it or when you're speaking it out loud, you're bringing awareness to it. And I think it then allows you to just see the whole picture. Whereas I think our default is to let the one that's like the loudest, which often tends to be the meanest or like the most negative. It's so much easier to be harder on ourselves than it is to be like really kind to ourselves. So I think that takes work.
Yeah. And what a great practice to just do that, because how much of our stories in our mind we think is reality, and it's absolutely not, you know, and we like operate based off of, oh, this is reality. This is almost like a fact. And then when you do look at it from that perspective of like, oh, let's consider the other side and let's like play the different scenarios, you'll usually get to a different like awareness of it. So I love that.
Yeah. And I think that's what you end up doing in therapy, right? Is there's just someone else to point out like, well, have you thought about it this way? And I love that they get to help facilitate that. And there's definitely been times where I can't see the other side. I really need someone to help me think through this. And then there's been times where like I do know the answer. I'm just like choosing the wrong story.
Let's dive a little bit into the mom guilt for a second, because that before you even said that that was what you were struggling with, I was going to ask you when you travel, like if you struggle with that with your kids, because I know I do. Like, yeah, mom guilt. It's hard. It's like you can't, in my mind and the expectation I sometimes put on myself, you can't win. It's like unless I was a stay-at-home mom, which is not the right thing for me, and I know that, there's always like this judgment that I put on myself of like analyzing, and I've gotten better, but I used to be like, okay, how many hours did I spend with my kids today? And like, was that enough, you know, hours? Or, you know, and there's sometimes I do catch myself when I'm like, shoot, I should have been more present. Like I was caught up in a work fire or something happening, and it can be rough. Like you really do beat yourself up for that. And I think we're so wired as moms to have, like, we want obviously to be the best for our kids, and we love them so deeply and so much that I think that's some of the like most challenging guilt that I experience is the mom guilt for sure. And I think it's especially challenging when you have like a dream that you're pursuing outside of motherhood as well. And then it's like, you've got that voice in the back of your head of like, am I doing too much? I feel good about pursuing my business, and like I never have like a question because I know I would not be a good stay-at-home mom. But then I'm always like, is it too much? I'm always analyzing, right? Like the hours I'm with my kids, and you know, what are they going to say when they're older? Was I present enough? And yeah, it's like it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, no, I struggle with that too. And the reframe that I like to often go back to is my mom was not a stay-at-home mom. She was a teacher. And, you know, she was an amazing teacher. She was a first grade, kindergarten. Most of her career, she was first grade. And there was a period where as I got a little bit older, she didn't have to work. Like my dad had reached a certain level where she definitely didn't have to work. And I remember her saying that she wouldn't give it up because she was teaching people how to read. And she was like, that is the most important skill. And she was really good at, she was kind of known for like being the teacher that could pull kids who were kind of struggling or behind. She just had this really like kind way of bringing them along. And so she felt so tied to this purpose. And I really loved that about her. I admired that about her. And so, you know, the antidote to my mom guilt in doing some of these things is like, I do think it's good for your kids to see you lit up about something and feeling really impactful outside of, you know, just the four walls of your home. And I think, you know, I have so much respect for stay-at-home mothers because I do that for periods of time. And I know that also is not the right path for me. And so I'm always trying to find harmony in, you know, the like giving of myself and the taking of myself. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a perfect balance, but I do know that I'm aware enough when I feel off kiltered. So like, for example, I went to LA this week for the book tour and I was gone for a couple days. I was gone for like 36 hours, but I was counting it in terms of like how many nights I missed bedtime, which was like not a very kind reframe. I was like, oh, I'm going to miss 2.5. But I got home and I could feel that I just was really missing them. Like it was not as much about like, do they know if I missed Monday and Tuesday bedtime? Because my husband is amazing and did that well. It was about like, I just missed them. So yesterday I intentionally like took my oldest and we just did like a little play date with just him and I. And it was a couple hours and it was just so fulfilling. Like, okay, like the guilt, again, if you go back to regular guilt, the guilt is like supposed to serve a purpose. And a lot of mom guilt doesn't serve a purpose. I think there's like a piece of it that is good to be aware of. It's like, okay, I felt like I was distant. So I'm going to have this like really intentional present time where I'm with my son and he remembers. And I think that's what he's going to remember from this week. He's not going to remember that I missed 2 bedtimes. He's going to remember that we had this like amazing play date and he was, diving for these gems that he's obsessed with and like making these really sweet memories, I think is like a healthy way of utilizing like our body's natural inclination and response system to do something good instead of just beating ourselves up about it. Because I truly believe that the best things that we can do for ourselves as mothers is to care for ourselves. And that can look a lot of different ways. For me, it sounds like for you, like caring for myself is watering these other projects that I feel really good about.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing too is like the guilt can serve a purpose, but instead of creating a story from it, putting awareness on it and then checking in with, okay, is this coming from a place of I'd like some quality time with my kids because I've maybe not had as much this week, or is it coming from a place of just judgment and that mean voice?
Yeah.
Versus, I feel the guilt, that means I'm a bad mom, right? Like you create that story. And so I think that what you're saying is beautiful in that the magic is in that awareness, which is the case with so many things, right? Yeah. Like the awareness, you put your spotlight on it and then you're able to see it for what it is versus the stories we create. So, and then, kids, I totally agree. Like they just want presents, even if it's for like presents, not like presents gifted, but like you to be present, even if it's like 30 minutes of pure presence with them compared to like 3 hours of somewhat, presence, they just remember that. So I try to remember that too. Of like if I had a week that I was gone more busy, more like what can I do to make it a special dinner or take them out on a date one-on-one. And you're right. That's what they're going to remember.
Yeah. And I mean, so I work from home and my kids are home a lot of the day. And they they'll often come up to me. And this is like one thing that works for me. And I'm not saying this has to work for everyone, but for me, I've kind of made this decision that if like I'm working and they come up to me and they want to sit on my lap or like say hi or whatever, if I'm not on a call, or actually sometimes when I am on a call, but I just go off video, like I almost never say no to that. And they don't usually want to stay for very long. Like they just want to come up and like cuddle for 30 seconds and then they're like on their way. And for me, that feels really good that I'm not telling them no a lot when it comes to my time. Like if there's any way, same thing with like playing, like I was getting ready this morning and I was like worried about being late. And my son was like, let's play cars. And we played for 3 minutes. And then he was like, okay, I'm hungry. I'm gonna go to snack with dad. But I do think it's like the subtle moments of him remembering that, I did prioritize him in those ways is like a small way of, making me feel better. And I also think often when I'm in these spirals of like, what would a friend say? Because like if you told me the instances where you felt mom guilt, like I would probably very clearly see it as like, you're an amazing mom. You're doing so much. And I could help, kind of turn that around. And we often do that for our friends and we don't do it for ourselves. And in preparing for the book, I had a book doula early on and she was incredible. And she said, why are you writing this book? Like, who is it for? And I was like, this is really for women in their first year of motherhood or in like a hard season of motherhood. And she's like, okay, you need to interview your reader. So figure out who that is, find a friend and go have a conversation. And I had a conversation with one friend and it was so nourishing to like hear her story and to be able to almost like say the things that, like, because you can see things so clearly when it's not you,
Yeah.
And after that, I was like determined to interview 100 women, which I did over the last 2.5 years. And the amount of times that like mom guilt came up or they felt like they weren't doing enough, like my jaw was to the floor. I'm like, you're doing so much. Like you're, just moms who were like, I don't want to let my baby like nap on anyone else. Like there's a lot of that sentiment of like, don't miss a moment, don't blink, don't,
I know.
you're not going to all of a sudden
goes fast.
Yeah. And it's like, time doesn't actually have to move fast. Time can actually move really slow when you want it to, It's like you can
spend a full weekend with the kids with nothing.
Exactly.
To do, and it'll feel like 500 hours.
Yes. Like when I had my first son, we were living in Chicago and we were there for like a winter where you were inside all day. And those moments I remember very vividly, moving like really, really slow. And so I think it's like these cliches that get thrown around that trip people up. And then it's like, again, like, why are you showing up in a certain way? Is it because like you have the time and it feels really good? Like, I love that. Yes, contact nap. I do that all the time. But if you're doing it because you are worried that like, you're not doing enough or you're not being a good enough mom or like
miss a moment or miss a nap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think, like mom guilt has for sure heightened, I feel like. Like, I don't think like my grandma felt this much mom guilt,
Yeah.
Do you think it's social media and like society? Why is it such high pressure now on us?
There's a name for this it's not coming to mind right now. It'll come to me, where like there's studies now that have shown this. Apparently, like in the past, every generation has done better than the generation before them. And that's declining. It's not intensive parenting. That's what it is, I think. And there's this idea floating around that like, again, masculine energy, if you don't do, your child won't, fill in the blank. Your child won't be smart, successful, well-rounded, whatever the thing is. And so it puts even more pressure on mothers who are primarily the primary caregiver to do all the things that they can think of to make their kid be the way that they want them to be or to give them every opportunity. And that has been increasing, like specifically in our generation, of feeling like, it's all on us. And that's so not true. Like your kids are going to, again, the feminine side, the intuitive side is like, my kid is going to learn that thing when they're supposed to learn that thing. They're going to be really inclined to, like sports or like music or, whatever their gifts are will show themselves, instead of this feeling of like, if I don't enroll my kid in jujitsu before he's 3, like he's not going to be X,
Right.
So I think there is I think social media doesn't make it any better. I also think that, for a long time, there was like the paradox of like men were the primary caregivers or the primary providers. And then there was this whole era where like women, were entering, where like that was what you were striving for, was to be like a man. Like I remember being at the law firm and, feeling so aware that all the partners in the business and finance group were all men, other than one. And it was like this really, like there was a big separation between men and women. And I was always trying to get to this place where I was like on parity. And when I had my son, I was working with this, he was like, still is one of my closest friends, same age, same year out of law school. We had same position, but I took 6 months of maternity leave, 7 months of maternity leave. And I remember feeling that like, I'm not going to be able to keep up with him because he's not taking that same time. And so eventually now, 4.5 years later, like what I'm really comfortable with is like, I don't actually need to be on that same timeline. I think there's like a growing sentiment in our culture of like, do we really need to do it all? Because it's actually not possible. Like there are 2 finite resources in life, and that is time and energy. So it's not possible for me to be working 60 hours a week and also home with my kids, whatever, 100 hours a week or whatever it is. Like the math doesn't add up. So it is like making conscious choices of what feels right. And I think that that's something that we're like all grappling with right now, because for a long time it was just catching up to men and being the providers. And now it's like, okay, but there's so many differences between men and women, particularly in the parenting arena.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Although I think that's changing too. Like, I'm so grateful to be in this point in time. Like, my husband is definitely 50-50, I would say, on the weeks that I'm going on these book tours or whatnot, or traveling for work. He's 60-40. He's like, he takes on more. And I think I see more and more parenting.
Yeah, my husband's
like that.
the same way. I mean, I am the breadwinner, and he works too, and we have a full-time nanny, but like, he cooks dinner every night.
Mm-hmm.
I travel, and he's full, take the kids to school, take them to the sports.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agree that that is shifting. And yeah, and there's like, I believe you can have it all,
I do too.
but I don't think you can do it all. And I think also everybody's definition of having it all is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
To some women, having a season of being a full-time stay-at-home mom, like I have friends that they want to do that. They, they're business owners and they want to do way less business, work 5 hours a week and just be with their kids, know? And for me, I know that that is not my path, but I know that I can also take my kids on a month-long trip and work 4 hours a day on that trip. And like, that's our have it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I always tell people, like, what's your have it all? What's that dream? And then create that, right? Because anything is possible, especially today. Really, you can create any, like with work and remote and how many hours you want to work, and you really can create that reality.
I love that reframe. I haven't heard of that. Like, you can have it all, you just can't do it all. I've often said you can do it all, just not in the same season.
Yeah.
So I remind myself of that too. It's like, maybe I'll do these other things that I want to do in a later season. Like, life is long, hopefully. And because I remember going back to work and talking to a coworker who I think she had 2 children. And she was like, yeah, I mean, I've kind of just come to terms with the fact that, like, I'm going to be a B+ employee and kind of a B+ mom. And I remember walking out of there and being like, that's not what I want. Like, I don't want to be a B+ mom. I want to be a mom. And again, like, your definition of a B+ or an A+ mom is different. But I think it's like, I want my kids to feel very seen and very held and very cared for. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I am with them all day. And for some people, that is what that means. And I think allowing for, like I always say, like, all mothers work. All mothers work. It's just, it's kind of these choice points, and there's no wrong or right or bad or good. And I think society really tries to tell you the opposite, that, like, there's a right choice and a wrong choice and a good choice and a bad choice.
Right. And our brains, right? Our brains usually like to go towards that too. Like, that's how we're wired, is let's look at the linear, right, wrong, good, bad, so we can make sense of it and then do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to look back in hindsight. Like, again, when I was looking through those voice notes, I was like, in the beauty of hindsight, I was like, oh my gosh, that thing had to happen to open this, or I had to say no to that to actually have space, or when this other thing came up, or it was actually, like, very beautiful. I think that's, the whole idea of, like, the butterfly effect. Or the one I love the most is, have you ever seen the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow?
Yeah.
It was like, I loved that movie. And it's like my favorite question to ask. I'd actually love to ask you. Can I turn the mic around on you?
Yeah.
Of, like, what was your sliding door moment? Like, what was that one moment where you could have gone left or you could have gone right and you chose left, and it's changed the trajectory for you?
I feel like I have a lot, but probably the biggest was I had my son when I was 20, and I got pregnant with my husband, but wasn't planning it. And, where I grew up in California, it was, like, actually crazy that I chose to keep the pregnancy and have him. So for sure, that is a huge one, because I became a mom at 20, and I went through a hard time of, like, trying to decide what I was going to do.
Wow.
Because I didn't have a lot of support to go through with having him.
Yeah.
Which was terrifying, at 19 years old. And then to have, like, really pretty much all my family and friends, to their, full respect to them, they thought it was the best thing for me, right, to not have a baby at 20. And so the encouragement was, don't. And I just was like, who am I to say when the right time is? I'm with the person that I want to have kids with. And I'm not in control of this, right? And so, I chose to have my son. And then that's what kickstarted my business, because it was, I need to come up with a way to make money, and I wanted to stay home with him. Like, I knew I didn't want to put him in daycare or like be separated from him.
Yeah.
And so I needed to come up with a way to make money online. And that's what started my whole business. So, I mean, otherwise I would have been on the path of finishing college and getting the degree, and I was going to do something with like holistic health and be like a naturopath, because I was really passionate in that. But I always knew I'd be an entrepreneur, but this business was not the plan. And it was because of him and that motivation that I was like, I'm going to work from home. And built the empire I have today really because of him, because I got pregnant at 19, right? Which at the time felt like, why is this happening? You know, I don't really want this to happen at this age, and scary, terrifying. And then you're fed a lot of just naturally like, you're going to be poor and struggle and life's over. You didn't get to enjoy your 20s, right? So, and then there's the shame of it, right? So at the time it felt like not what I wanted. But then looking back, it's like, that was for sure my path. That was what was supposed to happen. 100%.
That was always part of your map, of your journey. Yeah. Wow, that's so special that he gets to be like your sliding door moment. Yeah. And it's so funny because, again, it's like vantage point, because I was really shocked when I found out I was pregnant. People are always shocked to hear that, because I was 34. I'd been married for 4 years, but I just like couldn't see it. Like, I knew I wanted to be a mom, but it felt like it just didn't feel like the right time, you know? And looking back, I always say to myself, like, I don't live with regrets, but sometimes I wish I would have started earlier, you know? Like, what was I waiting for? You know, I was like, now that I have kids, and I'm like, we still travel all the time. We still have like a full, beautiful life. And so it's just interesting that it's like, we're told not to have kids too young, but then not to have them too late. And it's like, your path is kind of your path.
And you can make it whatever you want. I think that's what I learned through it, is like, you don't have these like predestined labels, because you become a mom at 20 or you become a mom at 40. Like, it's not like, okay, now slap all these labels on what's going to happen to you. It's like, we are the creator of our reality. So just because I got pregnant at 19 does not mean I was destined for a life of bad finances, right? With no college degree. Like, it's going to take energy and it's going to take effort, but like, you really can create anything that's possible. And I think it's so important for people to remember that, because there is so much, like, just between social media, there's just so much noise, right? Of like, oh, you know, I feel like especially around parenting and becoming a mom, and like, just there's so much just unsolicited, like, oh, you better be careful of this, and this is going to mean this, and you should do this. And in business too, it's like, this is the way to do it. And I always tell people, like, there's not a one way. Like, actually, most successful business stories are very non-conventional and very like, this happened and then this happened and I couldn't plan for it, and then I'm here.
They're like all a documentary. Because they're like some wild story.
Right.
Like,
because nothing is like here's the manual.
Right.
Like, nothing that is really your dream. It's like, you can't plan it all. And that is the feminine energy. And that is like trusting that. But it's just knowing like, what's the next step? And then it's knowing what's the dream. And then it's believing you can create that dream.
Yeah. Well, knowing what the dream is huge. And I think that goes back to what you said earlier of like, you can have it all. I mean, how incredible that you were like, okay, I'm going to do this, but I want to find some way to like make money and be home with my child. And interviewing these 100 women, either in their first year of motherhood or about their first year of motherhood, a lot of times it was the limitations that were coming up of like what they thought they could or couldn't do because they now had a baby. And when I told my husband I was pregnant, which I found out I was pregnant and then waited like 4 days before I told him.
Wow.
Because I just really wanted to get right with it myself. And I just wanted to like be in a good place when I told him, because he was ready before I was. Although he was aware that like that is maybe kind of normal because it wasn't going to affect him in the same way.
Right.
And when I told him I was pregnant, we were both like having that moment of like crying and hugging, and he stopped and he looked at me and he was like, we're going to do this together. You don't have to give up your dreams. And I remember realizing how much I needed to hear that, because for me, I almost had the opposite path. It was like I had done the things that the society tells you that you need to do to like check the boxes. And I'd finally gotten to a place where I was like really feeling good about my career. And then I heard like in my head, it was like, okay, well now you're going to have a baby and you're going to like kind of fall off this path. And that was so untrue. It honestly, and what I have found in talking to a lot of women is like a lot of times motherhood ends up being the catalyst to actually like create the life that you want. Because after that, I was like, okay, I don't really want to work for somewhere that I have to go in the office anymore. I want to be home. You know, we live in Austin normally, but we live in Michigan for like a month or two out of the summer. We go back to the lake house, like where I grew up, and we're with my parents, and my husband's parents come in from Chicago, and they get to have that like really full nourishing relationship because we're remote. And I think that goes back to like my definition of having it all is actually like feeling fulfilled in like a couple different arenas. And yeah, I mean, my son's 4.5, like 5 years ago, I could not have seen that path. It wasn't, COVID hadn't happened yet. No one in my industry was really remote. They had let me be remote on a temporary basis when I was in LA. And then as soon as my husband graduated, they were like, yeah, you got to come back. Nobody's remote. Like that doesn't really exist.
Wow.
And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. I think like becoming a mom, it just puts in perspective like your values, right? And you're like, okay, this is what I will tolerate. This is what I'm in alignment with. This is what I'm not.
Yeah.
And then there's so much creative energy when you are pregnant. Like I know for every one of my pregnancies, my business, like it's like a nesting effect in your business that you're like, I got to get it ready for, when I have the baby. And so it creates so much like creative energy, but also energy just to put into your business and like create the dream of what that looks like with the next kid or the kid. That was my experience. So I think there's so many women I also have on here that it was like, they had their baby and then they shut down a business and started a new one, or did just something big happened around that.
Yeah. I think there's that. And then I think there's also this sense of, like when you were mentioning the nesting period, I remember I had started writing the book with my first, and I remember calling my book doula when I found out I was pregnant for my second. And I was like so emotional because I was like, I needed to get this out because I'm not going to be able to finish it once I have the second. And she reminded me, she was like, you're writing this book about the first year of motherhood. You're going to go through it all over again with different like nuggets of wisdom and like a different perspective. And that's just going to make the book even better. So I guess I would just say for anyone who feels like that sense of like, I need to finish or accomplish something, before the first baby or before like the next baby, there's a sense, again, I think that's like a little bit of a falsehood of like, as I have more kids, like I'm going to have less time. It's like, actually my 4.5-year-old and my 1.5-year-old like really entertain each other well. And it's like, it's really sweet to watch them. And she was right. Like that year of going through it again made me more creative. I had more relationships that I had really like settled into Austin. I had interviewed 100 women for the book and met so many incredible people through the book that have now been supportive. And so sometimes it's just like hard to see.
Yeah.
We
put a lot of pressure, like deadline, right?
Yeah.
Like
well, it's
arbitrary.
The planning. Yeah. I was like, I have to have this done before.
Yeah.
And it's like, but do you?
I still do that to myself. And then I'm like, but why?
Yeah.
This is in your head.
Yeah. Well, that's actually such a potent question. Like, but why?
Yeah.
Why do I think I have to do it that way? Or why do I think this isn't possible after a certain point?
Yeah.
You figure out a way to like make it work for you.
And it could be even better, right?
Yeah.
Like for you, like waiting and then going through that again, that first year gave you even more wisdom.
Yeah. No, it did. I feel like so much more in tune with what is in the book. I also think like, I'm curious if you had this experience being like in your masculine energy and finding a lot of this balance between the two, is I really felt like I needed to do a lot myself. And what motherhood has also taught me is it's okay. It sounds like so simple and cliche that it's okay to ask for help. But people say to me now all the time, like, I don't know how you do it all. And I'm like very quick to say, It's because I have a lot of help.
Same.
It's
That's why I say I don't do it all.
I don't. Yeah. I that's exactly right. It's like I have, and I've asked for a lot of help, more than I thought I would in these certain areas. And you know, that's the way, like, and I guess that's where the social media stuff creeps in, is because a lot of times you see people like having it all. You don't understand how that is. And the reality is they probably have a lot of help, because everyone has the same 24 hours and the same, you know, relative energy. I mean, I don't know. I'm very into human design, so I'm a generator. So I know I have it. Are you a generator? Yeah. So, okay, there's a little bit of like that personality, your kind of characteristics. But generally speaking, if someone looks on social media like they're doing a million things, they probably have people behind the scenes like helping out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think that's like a skill that I learned, is the asking for help and also choosing where I put my time and energy.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned quickly with my business, as soon as I could afford hiring help, like I didn't want to spend a bunch of time cleaning and doing laundry when that was my time with my kids.
Yeah.
I'm going to hire that so that my time with my kids when I end work is playing, right? It's quality time. And so, I mean, it was a process over the last 10 years. Like in the beginning, we couldn't afford any help. And so my husband and I just like split shifts with our youngest or our oldest. But I learned, and I think I naturally have this skill, but I think it's fed a lot into being able to have it all and have success in different areas of life. Success, my version of it, is just being ruthless with my time and energy, right? Like, am I not going subconscious to where I'm putting it, and just because I have to do this, or like putting the pressure on myself, even this morning to do our interview, like my husband's driving my youngest to preschool. And I love driving him to preschool, right? So I had to like really be like, okay, but I'm going to choose that because I want to get home, you know, earlier today to play with him. And so that's also just like awareness on your time and energy. And is it in the place that's going to make you feel the most connected to your kids and your family, productive in your business, and then getting help on the things that like you really don't have to be doing. And I think the faster you realize that, the more you'll have it all. Yeah. Right.
One of my mentors asked me early on when I was doing the book of like, what's the more finite resource? Is it time or is it money? And she was like asking me honestly, like, is it that you don't have the time or you don't have the funds? Like what's the more finite resource? And for a lot of things in my life, like the more finite resource is time. Like I don't actually have time to do that thing. So like, that's where I'm going to put my resources towards. Or it might be like, I actually don't have a budget for that, so I'm going to do it myself. And like asking myself in those scenarios of what's more finite for that particular thing. It's been a really great like framework to operate under. And actually, even with the book, like initially, my book doula is very encouraging for self-publishing, just because the publishing world can be really masculine and very, like from a legal perspective, I'll say, you know, it's like the ownership rights of like the IP and like your ability to really have a say in like your own book. There's a spectrum from, you know, self-publishing. You have all the autonomy and all of the responsibility, all the way to a very traditional publishing relationship where you sign your rights away to your IP and you have a lot of help, but there's other things that come up with that. And I started the self-publishing route and I was writing the book, and there was a certain point where I was like, I'm not in a season where I can do this by myself. And so I actually found a hybrid publisher, and that worked out really well. Like I get to own the IP. We have a different split. But I didn't even know that existed. But I just started like talking about that. Like none of these feels right. Like one of them feels too, again, like too masculine, and one feels like too flowy. Like I need some accountability. I need someone, I don't know this process. It's a huge growth edge for me. I had never written a book before. I just felt like this like yearning of like God. I remember getting up one night and just being like, if I don't get this story out of me, it just feels wrong. You know, that like fire under you. And so I essentially found like a path that worked, a path that felt kind of in between there. But if I would have felt like I had to stick with my initial decision. So I say that a lot too, like it's okay to change your mind.
Oh, totally. I say
and
I reserve the
reassess.
right to change my mind anytime, right?
Yeah.
And especially as you like teach and have a platform, I say that because it's like right now in this current state and season, this is what I think. But I could change that, when I have more wisdom and go through experiences. Totally. Yeah.
And like evolve in my own. And I think that's the beauty of motherhood too, is like the reason that you have a lack of control. Like before my kids, I had a lot of control because it was control over myself, which we do have autonomy over, right? Like if I was feeling sad, I was going to go do an activity that lifted me up. Or if I was feeling down, I was going to figure out a way to. But when you introduce other people that you're responsible for and that you love so dearly, it's like, I can't control if my son is like going to be in a amenable mood to go to this place. Like I actually like, it's a constant lesson of letting go of the need to control and to like be nimble and to be, responsive versus reactive. Like I think about that a lot and how I can just be like ready and aware without having to like move all the pieces myself.
Yeah. For me, when I had my first, that was like the most challenging thing, the loss of control of my time in a day. Cause I was like the productive, like, just had full day like to myself. And then when I had my son, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm responsible for this human. Like every 2 hours it needs to eat.
Yeah.
Like I'm its food source. And then you've got the hormones that, you're so stressed when they're crying. And that was nothing could have prepared me for that experience.
Well, people often ask me like, what's the one thing that you would have said to yourself in pregnancy? Or like, what's the thing you wish you knew? And I feel like most people give us like really beautiful like words of wisdom. And honestly, for me, the thing that I think would have actually really changed the trajectory is understanding what matrescence is and the transformation that comes about when becoming a mother. And I remember where I was when I read about that term and just like feeling so seen. And I feel like that's why I'm so galvanized now about being a matrescence educator, is because so much of this change and transformation and like your priorities shifting, all of that feels like these kind of like soft things that are happening. And it would be like if you saw like an 11-year-old who was going through adolescence, but they didn't have a word for it. And they would just think like their hormones are changing and like they're growing breasts and they're like growing armpit hair or whatever the thing, like that, like the fact that we have a word for it, like you can look at a child who's going through adolescence and like you give them a lot of grace. You're like, oh, you're going through this developmental stage that is fundamentally going to change who you are. And it's necessary. It's like, can you imagine like wishing that a person on the other side of adolescence would go back? It's like, no, they've like crossed this big threshold through this initiation and they're a different person on the other side of it. And I think for me, I was so focused on the baby and just being a really good caretaker that I missed all the things that were going to happen to me as a woman in that transition from maiden to mother. And like like they can actually look at a brain scan of a woman who's been pregnant and the brain scans are different in a good way, actually, which is wild.
Yeah.
Like it's that profound.
I would love to dig into that a little bit. I know you said you're super passionate about that right now. And I also actually haven't even heard that term until right now. And when I had my kids, like no one talks about that. It's all about the baby, maybe breastfeeding and like what you're going to go through with that. But no one prepares you for what you're going to go through. And then I also feel like when you have the baby, the focus is on the baby.
Yeah.
Not really. I think it's shifting a little bit now. Like people are starting to realize these things of what the mother goes through. But let's dig into that a little.
Yeah. So I think the field of like perinatal psychiatry and just understanding the shifts that happen in pregnancy, especially through those first 2 years of motherhood, is really on the cusp of expansion. So matrescence is a term that was coined in the 70s by this woman, Dana Raphael. She's actually the same woman who gave us the word doula. So props to her for these big words that we now, doula is such a commonplace word. I always say that I like yearn for the day that matrescence won't be like underlined in the squiggly red. But matrescence is essentially the same thing as adolescence. adolescence is child to adult, matrescence is maiden to mother. And there's kind of like two big categories of what's happening. One is the brain rewiring. So people often talk about mommy brain, which is like the bane of my existence, especially because I come back to work after both pregnancies or both babies, and people would throw that term around. And mommy brain is such a myth. It's actually, what's going on is what's called synaptic pruning. So it's like how you go out to your garden and you weed to let things grow bigger. Your brain is recalibrating for caregiving. And so it's actually like you're not just like forgetting things. There's a part of your brain that is intentionally going in to make your brain more efficient. So you're most in that fluid state in the first 2 years. That's when the neuroplasticity is like really rewiring. So from pregnancy through the first 2 years of postpartum. And there's a lot of brain changes happening, but the two that really stick out to me are the prefrontal cortex is getting more efficient in decision-making, problem solving, all good things. And then the amygdala, which is normally like your alarm bell system, is becoming more attuned to your child. So that's like your responsiveness, your ability to kind of predict and be aware of how they're feeling, what they might need. And so our brain is changing. And then on top of that, or probably because of that, actually, there's a lot of hormonal changes happening too, right? There's prolactin, which is what creates breast milk. And there's a really high dopamine, oxytocin hits. You're being flooded with just numerous chemicals that are helping shift the brain. And that's why a lot of people, experience the big dip right after, is because in pregnancy, you're flooded with a lot of these. And if you continue breastfeeding, those hormones are a little more consistent. For me, the hardest period for both my babies was when I stopped breastfeeding, because that's when like the sharp decline of hormones hit. Like it was a more noticeable drop, I would say. And so, yeah, there's so much happening. And I think about this compared to adolescence all the time, because when you're going through it, when you're like 13, your primary job is to take care of yourself. You have somebody who's like cooking for you and caring for you. And you have like one job, which is to go to school, and you're kind of learning like social. And then when you go through matrescence, you're taking care of another human for the first time in your life. You're tired, you're sleep deprived. You probably don't have a bunch of people taking care of you. Hopefully you do. I think there's like a real trend in people understanding, like whether it's their partner or their postpartum doula. But historically, 3 months later, you're asked to like go back into a job while still caring for this child, while still going through what they are now saying. Matrescence is a bigger endocrine hormonal shift in your brain and body than adolescence is.
Wow.
And so the first study to even mention the word matrescence was in 2022, which is wild to think about the fact that when women haven't, can you imagine if we just figured out adolescence like 2 years ago?
Right.
Or 3 years ago, that would be, or if we didn't have a word for menopause. And so I think that it sounds so simple that it's like, okay, we've heard the word matrescence now and we can use it. But I think that what I've found in going and leading mother circles now for 4 years, because that's really where I shifted in having my babies. Like I went from leading a lot of meditations to leading a lot of circles. And as I've talked about this term, it's like, women feel this shared sense of like, okay, what I'm going through is real, and what I'm going through is quote unquote normal. Like it's a developmental stage. I'm not just going to feel like myself in 3 months. I'm going to go through an incredible identity shift, just like you do in adolescence, an incredible shift in your like social perception, your priorities, and all of that is actually for your greater good. I think society makes it seem like when you have a baby, you have mommy brain, you can't think, and you're just like, you're kind of in this like little incubation period until you can get back to your real life. And it's the opposite. It's like we are bouncing forward. I always use the reference of like the butterfly. And I think a lot of people forget that in between caterpillar and butterfly, there's this point where like the caterpillar dies, it becomes goo. There's like just a tiny little bit of it that actually remains the same. And the caterpillar is probably like what's happening. And then on the other side of it it's like this big, bright, beautiful creature. And I think that that's what ends up happening with us. But we're not used to like being in the goo. And people don't talk about the messy middle of
When there's
motherhood.
at least when I had my first, there's no like space for that.
Right.
Like, right. That wasn't even a thought. It's like, just take care of the baby,
Right.
like adapt.
Yeah.
Push through it,
Mhm.
and I think that creates almost like you're honoring that time,
Yeah.
which as it should, like it is a massive, beautiful transformation, but also the goo and really messy and challenging.
Yeah. I think about the same, like when a chicken hatches out of an egg, right? It's like they're like in this little egg and they probably initially think like the world is falling in on them because it's like their sky's cracking and like what's happening. And then they step out of that eggshell and they like look back and they're like, how did I even, it's like, I remember myself before, but I'm grateful for the version that has come and the metamorphosis that I've gone through both times, even if it was really hard and scary at times,
Yeah.
And I think having a word for it just makes me feel like just so less alone.
And having the science, I think science is such a universal language. It's like you can't argue that. And when you have like your brain is changing and these hormones and the chemicals and you're like literally rewiring.
Right.
It just gives it the power that it is, really.
Right.
It's not in your head. It's not like just an emotion that you're gotta get over or something.
Well, it's like, how do you dispel the myth of mom brain until you have science that shows that her brain is actually getting more efficient? Like that is the antidote to people throwing that around. It's like, actually, no, I'm better off. I am like recalibrating for efficiency. Instead of just like, I feel foggy at the moment. It's like, yeah, that's what neuroplasticity is. That's why adolescence also feels like a really crazy time for them, because their brain is rewiring at that stage of their life. And so, yeah, I just feel so passionate now about sharing the word. And I mean,
cool.
You're so not alone. Like on the book tour, I often say that the book is a portal, not a product, because usually what I talk about is matrescence. And like, usually people haven't heard the term. You know, it's like, it's not commonplace yet. And I think, but once they hear it, like they have the same feeling as I had when I read about it. Like, oh my gosh, I feel so seen,
Yeah. And really like honoring what you've gone through or are going to go through.
Right.
Yeah.
And knowing that it's like a stage that you go through as a person instead of just like, I remember being like, yesterday I wasn't a mom and today I am. That feels crazy.
It's so weird.
but it's not like an overnight change, but that is historically how we have seen it. Like you're, one day in between being a mother and not in it. And then you're like in it. And it's like, actually, no, this is a 2-year process of completely being in the goo, shedding myself, recreating parts of myself, creating the life so I can have it all, reimagining what having it all means is huge.
Yeah. Wow, I love it.
Yeah.
Anything final you feel like we didn't touch on? I feel like we could go for another hour. Like, honestly, I love talking to you.
No, I feel like we really covered a lot of things. And I love that one thing I'm going to take with me is I love that you called like being in your masculine your superpower, because I think that all people, men included, like I think the parts that I love about my husband are often like his ability to get in touch with his feminine side and to be like in that flow and be the caretaker. And I think it is a strength of ours to also be like in our masculine, and it's just finding that balance.
And of course, I'm sure like you'd probably, based on that, say similar. Like, I feel like I found a partner who can get in touch with their feminine, because that feminine energy, because I've lacked it for so long, and then also get to create the space for him to step more into his masculine as I step out of mine.
Yeah, this dance that we do.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful dance.
Yes.
And it's really important to find someone who can do that dance with you, because I'm not always in harmony. Like there are times when I need to be in one or the other. Or I should say I'm not always in balance. Like it's not always 50-50,
Nor I think should it be.
Right, exactly. It's constantly recalibrating.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And we will link your book, but where should people go to just follow you and continue to get your wisdom?
My Instagram is Chelsey Scaffidi. And then I also have an Instagram for the book, which is @TheMotherYear.
Okay.
And there's a website. And I have a portal on there called the Seasons Portal that just has free meditations for the season of motherhood that you're in. So that's another resource.
I love
you're
it.
Feeling like you want to tap into some more meditation, which I know you're
I know we didn't even
deep
get to
into.
I'm actually bummed we didn't get to talk about meditation. I have questions. We'll have to have you back on.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll also have you at one of my events or something if you're here, because I would love if you facilitate meditation.
I do, and I love that.
Okay.
I love holding space in that way.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This was
you.
an amazing conversation.
You too. I love being here in person. It's just so fun.
Thank you.
You too.